Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this very interesting event with Index Pharmaceutical. And today we're going to deep dive into the conversation in the US market. And with me today, I have Johan Geleus from Index Pharmaceuticals and senior consultant Dan Lernberg with an extensive experience from the US market within the field of UC and GI. Welcome to the audience, and today we stream live not only on the platform but on YouTube as usual, but also Facebook. Just to practical issues, all questions are more than welcome, and you post them on your lower right side of the window. I will forward the questions to the company at the end of the presentation. So let's start up. I will hand over the word to Johan Geleus. Welcome, guys.
Thank you, Klaus, and very warm welcome from my side as well. Then happy to be here to do this deep dive with Index Pharmaceuticals, and I'm joined here today also by Dan Lernberg, as Klaus mentioned. He will present himself a little bit later on, but I will kick off then to make a quick presentation of Index Pharmaceuticals, and in particular our main asset and cobitolimod. So as usual, then one should then read through the disclaimer that we have, very standardized and as a listed company, and I'll move swiftly over then to Index in brief then. Index is a late-stage biotech company. We're currently in phase 3 with our main asset cobitolimod that we developed for ulcerative colitis. I will come back to ulcerative colitis on the next slide. Then we have also a large portfolio of other chemically similar assets that we refer to as a DIMS platform. They are in very early stages, but we do believe that they have a potential in other inflammatory diseases outside of ulcerative colitis. We are based here in Stockholm on the campus of the Karolinska Institute, and as I mentioned, then we are a listed company and we IPO'd on Nasdaq then in 2016. Then we have around 5,000 shareholders, and our main shareholders are Link, HBM, the Swiss Life Science Investment Fund, the Fourth National Pension Fund, and also Handelsbanken Funds. So over then to ulcerative colitis, a very debilitating lifelong disease, which is a chronic inflammation of the large intestine, or the colon as I also refer to, which leads to ulcers in the mucosa in the colon. Then you normally experience then periods of active and inactive periods, or as also known as flares and remission. And if you are in a flare, you can then experience very frequent blood and mucus mixed loose stools, and you need to go to the toilet very often. And sometimes patient then can go to the toilet for 30, 40, even 50 times per day, which is of course have a high negative impact on the quality of life. Then another thing that strikes is that it debuts very early, then around 15 to 30 years of age. Sensitive year, of course, and then you have it for lifelong, then, which then is a very large burden for these suffering patients. Then, as testified below here by Felicia, then they are really impact her daily life then with having this ulcerative colitis, and when you are in flare, but also when you're expecting a flare. If you move over to the right, then you see the large intestine, and if you have ulcerative colitis, you have it in the part of the large intestine or in the entire intestine. If you have it in the entire intestine, it's called pancolitis, but we focus on the left-sided of the colon, which then is from the patient perspective, and the right side from your side as a viewer, which is the dark red area. Then what you also then see is that the disease comes in different severity, where you have the mild patients, but we also have the moderate and severe patients, which we focus on. These are very hard to treat, and it's the focus area for many of the advanced therapies that are currently both in market but also under development, and we are one of them. We have done quite significant studies around the market potential for Topital Mod over the years, and we still believe that after this is done this exercise in late 2021, that we have the blockbuster potential for Topital Mod, which then means that we can estimate that we will reach over $1 billion in sales once successfully launched on a global basis then. And how I arrived at that is that we have identified different reports that are available, and one of them then, together with others, then shows very strong historic growth up to 2020, 10% as a CAGR then, which then leads to a UC market, a global UC market for 7.5 billion, and that trickles down then to 3.5 billion for the sub-segment that we are focusing currently on, moderate to severe left-sided UC. And you flip over to the right, then 2026, you can see that the same report then forecast very strong growth going forward, and that will lead then to a moderate to severe left-sided UC market of over 5 billion then. And if you then apply a market share of 20 to 30% that we have underpinned with different studies, then will arrive at this blockbuster potential then. What we also have done, which is the main item for this exercise and the deep dive, is a project and to see the strategy for commercialization of Topital Mod, both in Europe and the US. We have had two different teams engaged, one for Europe and one for US. And if you then start with the European conclusions, is that the market is still very fragmented, and we believe that with Topital Mod, there's a really attractive opportunities to enter into strategic collaborations as we advance towards launch them. That goes also for other regions, except for the US, where we have an alternative strategy then, where we will self-commercialize, which we believe is a very attractive business case for the company then, and so on. And I'll now hand over then to Dan to lead us through the work that I've done and the conclusions made with this exercise for the US commercialization strategy. So over to you, Dan.
Thanks a lot, Johan. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Klaus. Thanks, Johan. It's really a pleasure to be here again in this forum to discuss our findings to guide Index in our commercial strategy and scale up infrastructure plan to support the sales and marketing effort, as Johan said, for Topital Mod in the US. My name is Dan Lundberg, and as far as background goes, I've been in the industry for, as you can see, over 30 years across startups, small, moderately sized, and large pharmaceutical, biotech, and device companies. I spent over half of my career in the GI space, with my first exposure coming as an international product manager at Wyeth Ayerst International, where they had in-licensed from Takeda a small molecule called lansoprazole, Zotan Lanzo. They actually had it in 11 countries outside the US. My responsibility was to help shape market planning, market strategy, as well as launch planning. And ironically enough, I had responsibility for the Nordic countries where the product was called Lanzo. You may be familiar with the product. Fast forward to the second half of my career. In 2002, I joined a company called Salix Pharmaceuticals. At the time, Salix had one product, Colazal, valsalazide sodium. It was a 5-ASA for mild to moderate ulcerative colitis. It was only doing about $30 million in sales a year. I was actually brought on board to facilitate the launch and launch planning, business planning for their second compound called rifaximin, which ended up having 3 GI-related indications: traveler's diarrhea, hepatic encephalopathy, which was a hybrid call point hepatology and gastroenterology, and then eventually IBS. Salix afforded me a ton of career growth. I ended up eventually as the senior vice president of marketing for Salix and sat on their executive team. And you may know the story. In 2015, in April of 2015, Valiant, now Bausch Health, purchased Salix Pharmaceuticals, acquired Salix Pharmaceuticals. After we had grown from one product to 16 products and 17 indications, Our demand sales at the time were over $2 billion, and our enterprise value was $15.8 billion. So it can be done. Just be patient. And all that to say, I'm keenly interested in the GI space. It's really been thrilling for me to work alongside the index management team over the past year, really, on cobitalimod, and I've been really impressed. And before we get into this morning's discussion, I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce Thilo Barhofer, who you see also on this slide. So everything that's presented this morning, I did in partnership with Thilo and his team at FMed, and you can see he's very well credentialed as well. So let's get started. So as we move through the presentation this morning on the commercial opportunity for cobitalimod, I'd like you to come away with 4 key takeaways. First and foremost, the IBD market, specifically the UC market, it's very well established, but it's still growing. And this is important because Index, as they seek to scale up in the US to support cobitalimod's launch, they won't have to spend crucial budget dollars on disease state education, market creation, or expansion, as this has been done, this is being done, and this will continue to be done as they execute cobitalimod's clinical development plan. It's very important. Secondly, we know through patient journey marketing research that UC patients lead an extraordinarily active lifestyle and play a prominent role and are fully engaged in their own IBD management. In that respect, Index can focus their marketing spend on cobitalimod product education, market access, and pull-through. That's critical versus patient activation, right? This is a very motivated group of patients. The third takeaway, despite new approvals, especially with biologics, as we all know, we're still only about 1/3 of UC patients are treated with these agents. Studies have found that up to 50 to 70% of UC patients will potentially relapse within the first year. And many of these patients have 8 to 10 flares a year. That's almost a flare a month. In other words, UC patients, despite the innovation, they still require better control. And finally, the prescribing physician audience. And this is very important as we look to scale up. It's a very highly concentrated group and can be adequately and systematically reached with a small, agile, sophisticated, but highly experienced and hardworking field force. This supports the economics and the efficiency by which Index can achieve their sales revenue and profit goals for cobitalimod. So US market. As we know, it is still the largest pharmaceutical market in the United States, and the UC market, it's no exception, accounting for 65% of worldwide UC sales, reaching $5 billion in 2020, and over the last 4 years, growing at a 10% clip. Growth has been driven by increased diagnosis rates, introduction to new therapies, as well as new increased advanced therapies in patients with moderate to severe disease, and that's important. And forward looking, as you can see, we're still projecting a fairly robust mid to upper single digit growth rate, not insignificant. In terms of scale and infrastructure, as we began to really dig into this process, we leveraged the use of both qualitative and quantitative marketing research, advisory board feedback. Index has a wonderful medical advisory board, published data, syndicated reports, and syndicated prescription data, specifically from Symphony Health Solutions. And we asked ourselves these key questions. Which commercial models are employed in the US market? How do they match market needs and prescriber structure? As it relates to Index, what are the best strategic options to deploy? Very important. And notably, what is the required infrastructure and scale-up timeline as it relates to cobitalimod's clinical development program? That timeline is very important. Additionally, we married up 3 key analytical areas in developing recommended strategies for Index. So you can see in the center of the slide, US prescriber base. How many prescribers exist? Where are they located? How are they segmented? Moving counterclockwise. And of course, the market and sales data, very important. How are sales and prescriptions distributed across geographies? Which specialties prescribe? Is it just gastroenterologists? Is it internists, GPFPs, POs? And finally, are there peer and analog companies that we can evaluate? And how can they be leveraged to help shape commercial strategies for Index? And of course, here I bring my own experiences from Salix to the table. So let's take a look at some of the output for our analysis. As we've communicated, the GI prescriber base, it's highly concentrated. It's very concentrated. As you can see here, what the data shows that 80% of gastroenterologists are just from 20 states, with a concentration up and down the East and West coasts, the upper Midwest, the South, and the Southwest. What we also know is that there are 50 key institutions in the United States that we would deem IBD centers of excellence. These are institutions like Cornell and Mount Sinai in New York City, Beth Israel Deaconess in Boston, Atlanta Gastro in Georgia, Mayo Rochester, Minji or Minneapolis Gastro, Duke and UNC Chapel Hill in North Carolina, the University of Miami, Mayo Scottsdale, Cedars-Sinai in LA, and University of Washington in Seattle, just to name a few. And many of Index's advisors come from some of these institutions. But the point being, based on our regional and zip code and level analysis, and where most of the community-based prescribing gastroenterologists reside, with our proposed infrastructure, we will be able to, or Index will be able to cover these centers as well. So it's a really efficient structure and blueprint that we recommended. So a little more granularity of our analysis. Let me level set you here. On the top, we have 3 groups of physicians. They're essentially decile groups. You see them: high prescribers, medium prescribers, low prescribers. On the bottom, we have their percent contribution of prescriptions. As you can see, a small minority, or the top deciles, contribute a majority of the prescriptions. Something to note here, however, there's a tendency in a situation like this to have a desire to call on every prescriber. This is how big pharmaceutical companies end up with thousands, literally thousands of reps, because they want every healthcare practitioner. They want to touch everyone. They want every script. We call this FOMO here in the US, fear of missing out, right? But that's not what Thilo and I recommended here. From a profitability standpoint, it's actually better to call on the top deciles more frequently at the expense of the lower decile groups. It's just more profitable. As I noted earlier as well, we evaluated some analog companies as we assessed what infrastructure recommendations to make to Index, not the least of which was Salix, which way back when I started had 30 reps. It quickly scaled to 64, and then we eventually scaled to in that 96 to 97 range once rifaximin was approved. It also wasn't lost in our research that companies like Janssen, Pfizer, and Takeda maintain gastroenterology field forces of around 90 to 135. In addition, a company Index will watch closely over time is Ardelyx. They just launched their sodium hydroxygen exchange 3 inhibitor, hydrogen exchange 3 inhibitor, tenapanor, Ibsrela, for IBS constipation in adults in the US just last month. This is their first product launch in the US, and I believe their model for successful commercialization will be similar to the one Index should deploy in the US. So this is an early look at our proposed output for the field force infrastructure that Index can successfully commercialize cobitalimod in the US with. I just want to note that this does not include medical science liaison team. It doesn't include market access and other key support functions. This is just essentially the sales force side of the org chart. So you can see they have essentially a chief commercial officer, a VP of sales and marketing at the top of the chart. You have 6 regions cutting across various regions across the United States, with 2 districts or sales areas laddering up within each region, with a total of 12 headquarter cities, if you will. That's what we call those. So that gives you an early look of what that infrastructure in the US might look like. And really, at this point, we'll just conclude our analysis. And so you see the points here. U.S. launch of cobitalimod by Index, it's a highly attractive strategy with what should be a gated investment. And we spoke about this in the introductory comments. Johan spoke to this. As clinical milestones are met, investment should be gated with most resources added post-2025. Index will aim to build an agile, modern, if not sophisticated commercial model focused on the moderate to severe UC patient, their physicians, of course, with an emphasis on the product and market access. As discussed, a high geographical concentration of US gastros can be effectively covered with the appropriate frequency, as a small proportion of physicians account for most prescriptions for advanced UC therapies. And as noted, Index will continue to assess peer analog companies to refine their scale-up models and commercial strategies leading into approval and launch. So that's it for my comments. I'm going to hand it back over to Klaus, and we'll see if we have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Great presentation. Really gives a good picture of what you guys are doing in US. Thanks a lot. There's a couple of questions popping in here. I think the first couple of questions is more for Johan. Johan, there's a question coming in here about the expected cost from now to the commercial stage. The participant here write full market penetration 80% in US. This is of course a little sensitive, but could you elaborate a little on the expected cost? I know as of today, Johan, you have sufficient cash on your balance for most of the phase 3 study and some of the launch as well. But could you comment a little on the expected cost, Johan?
I think we need to take a step back then. We did a capital raise in 2021. We raised around 500 million Swedish kronor for the first induction study and the maintenance piece that is attached to that induction study then.
Right.
That will lead us through this induction study, the first one, and we have top-line data readout and expected in late 2023. Then after, we need to raise additional money to do the second induction study, but we then have good data, hopefully, then to underpin the capital raise then. And that same goes also for the commercial piece, because then we will have the second induction data available that confirms hopefully the first data, and then we raise the money. So we do stepwise financing, but we have not disclosed the exact amounts for any of these capital raises then, but you can at least assume that the first raise that will come in 2023, 2024 will be in the region of the same amount that we had in 2021 then. But otherwise, we will not disclose any details then. We do have some rough numbers, but I don't think that's appropriate to disclose.
Yeah, good answer, Johan. Thanks a lot. And a little follow-up question to that, because if we then assume two rounds more, of course, if we assume everything goes all right, and then briefly really describe how the market is working in US and this pair Adelis that you're looking into their launch, could you expect that with those good data you have today and with the good follow-up data you have on the phase 3 study, that you will choose a strategy where you both go directly with Dan and the team to centers and physicians, but also do a partner structure in US? Or is that out of the question?
I mean, we are very opportunistic here. I think we have one clear strategy, which now Dan has done an excellent presentation regarding. But of course, there might be options coming down the line, but you can only speculate for the time being. So I think we're open for other opportunities, but we do have our main track that we will follow.
Yeah, good. And there's a question going for this as well, and Dan, I think you touched upon it, but maybe you can do it again. Normally you see small one product companies partnering up, but you mentioned that the characteristic of the US market actually offers good opportunities for Index to succeed in US. Could you elaborate a little on why you would choose to go alone?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of confusion, and Johan, I don't want to speak out of turn. Seeing some of the questions come in, this analysis and planning that Index is doing, I just want to commend them at this early stage that they're doing such extensive work. It doesn't mean that Index wants to or needs to go alone, right? But as they sit across potential partners that may be interested in cobitalimod, which is an unbelievably attractive asset in this space, it's important for them to be able to talk intelligently about what an infrastructure might look like. And they've done that work, right? So they have options. This provides Index options. And as I said in my presentation, look at Ardelyx. They're launching into a very noisy space in IBS. And there's similarities with regard to tenapanor. It's a differentiated compound, very interesting in a space where they're used to seeing molecules with all the same mechanism. Cobi's very unique and differentiated, interesting mechanism, targeted therapy, point of disease, method of administration. So there's opportunity. So this is all about ensuring that Index can set their best foot forward, whether they partner or whether they go it alone. And I think they could find success both ways.
That's a very good answer to those questions.
I think I can add that because I mean, as part of the management team, we were discussing should we go alone in the US. We believe that we could do that, etc. But that's just from an internal perspective. We needed some robust evidence that this is doable, and that's why we then commissioned Dan and Tilo to do this work. Then that was one of the questions: can it be done? Yes. Secondly, when is the right timing for this? We would like to know that we were not too late. That's one of the really key aspects here. That we know that we see a good time to allow us to prepare for this. And as on this second bullet point here, I mean, the most of the resources will be added in 2025 and onwards, which give us plenty of time to fine tune this plan, but also to raise the needed cash. Then, so I think we are in good shape. We are early on, but there is no hurry.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Yeah, there's some questions here. I try to answer them also because I think you already answered those about when you're going to burn cash on Salesforce and etc. But as you mentioned before, Johan, the first question, you won't do that before you have both results from your phase 3 study. So
Exactly.
what Dan and his team is doing now is actually consultancy work on how and when and why, and then, whether you raise money or partnering, that's not decided yet, as I understand it.
And I think we need to also have our close attention to the market development, and things can happen here over time, and then we need to adjust our plans. But we have a plan that we will at least view as our main plan, and then we'll fine tune as we go along.
Yeah, that's right. I have a little question again, Dan, regarding the infrastructure. So you told us you have these centers with high specialized within the field, and then you have the physicians as well. Are they scattered in a different way in US, or are they also in close proximity to the big cities?
Yeah, so in most situations, the headquarter cities that we've recommended will allow for dual coverage of the IBD centers of excellence as well as community-based physicians. Yeah, there's outliers, right, with any analysis, but you'd be surprised how far patients are willing to drive to get help when they're sick. But the infrastructure that we've called for, the blueprint, allows for double coverage of both the centers as well as the community. It's a really efficient structure. We saw a number of these thought leaders at DDW. It's very exciting. They're enthused about the ongoing market development that Index is doing. It's really interesting compound.
Thanks a lot. Then a small question for you, Johan. Are you still seeking a new CEO, or will you take over as permanent CEO?
No, I'm the acting CEO, and the board is doing a recruitment process for the time being, and then we will come back on the announcement of a new CEO in due course then, but it's ongoing.
Good. Thanks a lot. And then when we talk about the rest of the world, because you mentioned that before, lately on your Capital Markets Day, you will pursue a little different strategy compared to US. Could you elaborate a little on that, and if you have any digits on what kind of royalties you will receive from a partnering structure?
I think that's very early on, and we'll talk about royalty streams then, but I think we will do some prep work when it comes to partnering, but I think firstly we need to have the good data from the first induction study as a starter for more advanced discussions than when it comes to Europe and other regions. But so we need to come back on that because it's just speculation otherwise.
No, that's true. But what I know, and Dan, and you can probably confirm that when you have very strong data like you do, and you really have a very good, strong data package, both on the side effects, which is of course of great importance, but also the actual effect, and you are in phase 3, normally you will get a better royalty compared to phase 2. We can underline that at least. I know that won't.
I mean, that's the expectation, and one of the reasons why you then advances things forward is that you will have a high return on investment and going forward, but you have de-risked the asset as we go along then. So I mean, that's part of the business model within the life science.
And for you, Dan, with your great experience within the field, have you seen anything similar to Index with the effect and efficacy rates that they show? I can say in our part of the world, this is not every day you see this.
Yeah, again, they engaged, at least myself. Thilo's been working with Index for a little bit longer than I have, but it's been really interesting digging into the compound. Ironically enough, another startup that I was involved in, we took a look at cobitalimod a couple of years ago as well. I'll stick with this story, right? It's a unique mechanism, given at the point of disease. So a targeted therapy, and the phase 2 data is solid. And I think Johan knows this. It's important at this point to put as much resource as possible behind executing the phase 3 trial and seeing this through and getting this really unique, what appears to be safe and efficacious compound to patients.
Thank you a lot. And then just one final question, because the way Index administer the product is a little different from what you have seen other guys do, and that's probably why they also have these good data. Do you see this as a challenge for the physicians and the centers in the US, or is it just a new way of doing it?
Yeah, I think the latter. It's a new way of doing it. The research, I was a little reluctant. I'm not gonna lie. When I was first digging in with regard to an enema and the method of administration, the research that has not borne that out to be, the doctors and physicians both in market research are very accepting of the method of administration. I think part of it is it's not daily It's not administered daily, right? And that's very important. It's only administered twice over a 3-week period.
Yes.
And that's extraordinarily unique. And to get the efficacy and safety results that we've seen in phase 2, as I said, we need to navigate through phase 3 and get this unique compound to patients.
I think just to add what Dan said, I mean, we have it's self-administrated. You can do it in the comfort of your home. You don't have to go to the hospital, etc. So it has a lot of patient convenience, which then it's something that is valuable by the patient, and that and the infrequent dosing, of course, then once every 3rd week is not that often at all, and some of them are also used with the rectal formulation from other products. And so we believe that is more of a marketing thing rather than the patient and physicians.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, well, thanks a lot, guys. I think there's no further question. And with that said, I would like to thanks a lot for your participation today on this event. Thanks a lot, Dan, for great insight into the US market. Hope to see you again. And Johan, thanks a lot for presenting at this small event where we dived into the US market. And thanks for all the great questions from the audience. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
Thanks for the invitation.
Bye.